Are you tired? Are you tired? Are you tired? I am tired. I am tired. I am tired. I am not tired. I am not tired. I am not tired. Is she a neighbor? Is she a neighbor? Is she a neighbor? She is a neighbor. She is a neighbor. She is a neighbor. She is not a neighbor. She is not a neighbor. She is not a neighbor. Were you a cashier? Were you a cashier? Were you a cashier? I was a cashier. I was a cashier. I was a cashier. I was not a cashier. I was not a cashier. I was not a cashier. Was he a teacher? Was he a teacher? Was he a teacher? He was a teacher. He was a teacher. He was a teacher. He was not a teacher. He was not a teacher. He was not a teacher. Are you a doctor? Are you a doctor? Are you a doctor? I am a doctor. I am a doctor. I am a doctor. I am not a doctor. I am not a doctor. I am not a doctor. Is he a colleague? Is he a colleague? Is he a colleague? He is a colleague. He is a colleague. He is a colleague. He is not a colleague. He is not a colleague. He is not a colleague. Were you a manager? Were you a manager? Were you a manager? I was a manager. I was a manager. I was a manager. I was not a manager. I was not a manager. I was not a manager. Was he a customer? Was he a customer? Was he a customer? He was a customer. He was a customer. He was a customer. He was not a customer. He was not a customer. He was not a customer. Are you busy? Are you busy? Are you busy? I am busy. I am busy. I am busy. I am not busy. I am not busy. I am not busy. Is she a relative? Is she a relative? Is she a relative? She is a relative. She is a relative. She is a relative. She is not a relative. She is not a relative. She is not a relative. Were you an employee? Were you an employee? Were you an employee? I was an employee. I was an employee. I was an employee. I was not an employee. I was not an employee. I was not an employee. Was he a teenager? Was he a teenager? Was he a teenager? He was a teenager. He was a teenager. He was a teenager. He was not a teenager. He was not a teenager. He was not a teenager. Are you hungry? Are you hungry? Are you hungry? I am hungry. I am hungry. I am hungry. I am not hungry. I am not hungry. I am not hungry. Is he a classmate? Is he a classmate? Is he a classmate? He is a classmate. He is a classmate. He is a classmate. He is not a classmate. He is not a classmate. He is not a classmate. Were you a driver? Were you a driver? Were you a driver? I was a driver. I was a driver. I was a driver. I was not a driver. I was not a driver. I was not a driver. Was he a waiter? Was he a waiter? Was he a waiter? He was a waiter. He was a waiter. He was a waiter. He was not a waiter. He was not a waiter. He was not a waiter. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? I am ready. I am ready. I am ready. I am not ready. I am not ready. I am not ready. Is she a cousin? Is she a cousin? Is she a cousin? She is a cousin. She is a cousin. She is a cousin. She is not a cousin. She is not a cousin. She is not a cousin. Were you a volunteer? Were you a volunteer? Were you a volunteer? I was a volunteer. I was a volunteer. I was a volunteer. I was not a volunteer. I was not a volunteer. I was not a volunteer. Was he a salesman? Was he a salesman? Was he a salesman? He was a salesman. He was a salesman. He was a salesman. He was not a salesman. He was not a salesman. He was not a salesman. Are you sad? Are you sad? Are you sad? I am sad. I am sad. I am sad. I am not sad. I am not sad. I am not sad. Is she a sister? Is she a sister? Is she a sister? She is a sister. She is a sister. She is a sister. She is not a sister. She is not a sister. She is not a sister. Were you a programmer? Were you a programmer? Were you a programmer? I was a programmer. I was a programmer. I was a programmer. I was not a programmer. I was not a programmer. I was not a programmer. Was he a tourist? Was he a tourist? Was he a tourist? He was a tourist. He was a tourist. He was a tourist. He was not a tourist. He was not a tourist. He was not a tourist. Are you cold? Are you cold? Are you cold? I am cold. I am cold. I am cold. I am not cold. I am not cold. I am not cold. Is she a roommate? Is she a roommate? Is she a roommate? She is a roommate. She is a roommate. She is a roommate. She is not a roommate. She is not a roommate. She is not a roommate. Were you a firefighter? Were you a firefighter? Were you a firefighter? I was a firefighter. I was a firefighter. I was a firefighter. I was not a firefighter. I was not a firefighter. I was not a firefighter. Was he a coach? Was he a coach? Was he a coach? He was a coach. He was a coach. He was a coach. He was not a coach. He was not a coach. He was not a coach. Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy? I am happy. I am happy. I am happy. I am not happy. I am not happy. I am not happy. Is he a partner? Is he a partner? Is he a partner? He is a partner. He is a partner. He is a partner. He is not a partner. He is not a partner. He is not a partner. Were you a scientist? Were you a scientist? Were you a scientist? I was a scientist. I was a scientist. I was a scientist. I was not a scientist. I was not a scientist. I was not a scientist. Was he a musician? Was he a musician? Was he a musician? He was a musician. He was a musician. He was a musician. He was not a musician. He was not a musician. He was not a musician. Are you a pharmacist? Are you a pharmacist? Are you a pharmacist? I am a pharmacist. I am a pharmacist. I am a pharmacist. I am not a pharmacist. I am not a pharmacist. I am not a pharmacist. Is she an ant? Is she an ant? Is she an ant? She is an ant. She is an ant. She is an ant. She is not an ant. She is not an ant. She is not an ant. Were you a security guard? Were you a security guard? Were you a security guard? I was a security guard. I was a security guard. I was a security guard. I was not a security guard. I was not a security guard. I was not a security guard. Was he an athlete? Was he an athlete? Was he an athlete? He was an athlete. He was an athlete. He was an athlete. He was not an athlete. He was not an athlete. He was not an athlete. Are you an artist? Are you an artist? Are you an artist? I am an artist. I am an artist. I am an artist. I am not an artist. I am not an artist. I am not an artist. Is she a niece? Is she a niece? Is she a niece? She is a niece. She is a niece. She is a niece. She is not a niece. She is not a niece. She is not a niece. Were you a receptionist? Were you a receptionist? Were you a receptionist? I was a receptionist. I was a receptionist. I was a receptionist. I was not a receptionist. I was not a receptionist. I was not a receptionist. Was he a pilot? Was he a pilot? Was he a pilot? He was a pilot. He was a pilot. He was a pilot. He was not a pilot. He was not a pilot. He was not a pilot. Are you a mechanic? Are you a mechanic? Are you a mechanic? I am a mechanic. I am a mechanic. I am a mechanic. I am not a mechanic. I am not a mechanic. I am not a mechanic. Is she a coworker? Is she a coworker? Is she a coworker? She is a coworker. She is a coworker. She is a coworker. She is not a coworker. She is not a coworker. She is not a coworker. Were you a bartender? Were you a bartender? Were you a bartender? I was a bartender. I was a bartender. I was a bartender. I was not a bartender. I was not a bartender. I was not a bartender. Was he a director? Was he a director? Was he a director? He was a director. He was a director. He was a director. He was not a director. He was not a director. He was not a director. Are you a plumber? Are you a plumber? Are you a plumber? I am a plumber. I am a plumber. I am a plumber. I am not a plumber. I am not a plumber. I am not a plumber. Is she a dancer? Is she a dancer? Is she a dancer? She is a dancer. She is a dancer. She is a dancer. She is not a dancer. She is not a dancer. She is not a dancer. Were you a baker? Were you a baker? Were you a baker? I was a baker. I was a baker. I was a baker. I was not a baker. I was not a baker. I was not a baker. Was he a professor? Was he a professor? Was he a professor? He was a professor. He was a professor. He was a professor. He was not a professor. He was not a professor. He was not a professor. Are you worried? Are you worried? Are you worried? I am worried. I am worried. I am worried. I am not worried. I am not worried. I am not worried. Is she a mentor? Is she a mentor? Is she a mentor? She is a mentor. She is a mentor. She is a mentor. She is not a mentor. She is not a mentor. She is not a mentor. Were you a stylist? Were you a stylist? Were you a stylist? I was a stylist. I was a stylist. I was a stylist. I was not a stylist. I was not a stylist. I was not a stylist. Was he a photographer? Was he a photographer? Was he a photographer? He was a photographer. He was a photographer. He was a photographer. He was not a photographer. He was not a photographer. He was not a photographer. Are you a consultant? Are you a consultant? Are you a consultant? I am a consultant. I am a consultant. I am a consultant. I am not a consultant. I am not a consultant. I am not a consultant. Is she an advisor? Is she an advisor? Is she an advisor? She is an advisor. She is an advisor. She is an advisor. She is not an advisor. She is not an advisor. She is not an advisor. Were you a waiter? Were you a waiter? Were you a waiter? I was a waiter. I was a waiter. I was a waiter. I was not a waiter. I was not a waiter. I was not a waiter. Was he a veterinarian? Was he a veterinarian? Was he a veterinarian? He was a veterinarian. He was a veterinarian. He was a veterinarian. He was not a veterinarian. He was not a veterinarian. He was not a veterinarian. Are you curious? Are you curious? Are you curious? I am curious. I am curious. I am curious. I am not curious. I am not curious. I am not curious. Is she a supervisor? Is she a supervisor? Is she a supervisor? She is a supervisor. She is a supervisor. She is a supervisor. She is not a supervisor. She is not a supervisor. She is not a supervisor. Were you a clerk? Were you a clerk? Were you a clerk? I was a clerk. I was a clerk. I was a clerk. I was not a clerk. I was not a clerk. I was not a clerk. Was he an engineer? Was he an engineer? Was he an engineer? He was an engineer. He was an engineer. He was an engineer. He was not an engineer. He was not an engineer. He was not an engineer. Are you nervous? Are you nervous? Are you nervous? I am nervous. I am nervous. I am nervous. I am not nervous. I am not nervous. I am not nervous. Is she a client? Is she a client? Is she a client? She is a client. She is a client. She is a client. She is not a client. She is not a client. She is not a client. Were you a technician? Were you a technician? Were you a technician? I was a technician. I was a technician. I was a technician. I was not a technician. I was not a technician. I was not a technician. Was he an actor? Was he an actor? Was he an actor? He was an actor. He was an actor. He was an actor. He was not an actor. He was not an actor. He was not an actor. Are you comfortable? Are you comfortable? Are you comfortable? I am comfortable. I am comfortable. I am comfortable. I am not comfortable. I am not comfortable. I am not comfortable. Is she a sponsor? Is she a sponsor? Is she a sponsor? She is a sponsor. She is a sponsor. She is a sponsor. She is not a sponsor. She is not a sponsor. She is not a sponsor. Were you a janitor? Were you a janitor? Were you a janitor? I was a janitor. I was a janitor. I was a janitor. I was not a janitor. I was not a janitor. I was not a janitor. Was he a producer? Was he a producer? Was he a producer? He was a producer. He was a producer. He was a producer. He was not a producer. He was not a producer. He was not a producer. Are you a gardener? Are you a gardener? Are you a gardener? I am a gardener. I am a gardener. I am a gardener. I am not a gardener. I am not a gardener. I am not a gardener. Is she a niece? Is she a niece? Is she a niece? She is a niece. She is a niece. She is a niece. She is not a niece. She is not a niece. She is not a niece. Were you an electrician? Were you an electrician? Were you an electrician? I was an electrician. I was an electrician. I was an electrician. I was not an electrician. I was not an electrician. I was not an electrician. Was he a researcher? Was he a researcher? Was he a researcher? He was a researcher. He was a researcher. He was a researcher. He was not a researcher. He was not a researcher. He was not a researcher. Are you a dentist? Are you a dentist? Are you a dentist? I am a dentist. I am a dentist. I am a dentist. I am not a dentist. I am not a dentist. I am not a dentist. Is she a godmother? Is she a godmother? Is she a godmother? She is a godmother. She is a godmother. She is a godmother. She is not a godmother. She is not a godmother. She is not a godmother. Were you a lifeguard? Were you a lifeguard? Were you a lifeguard? I was a lifeguard. I was a lifeguard. I was a lifeguard. I was not a lifeguard. I was not a lifeguard. I was not a lifeguard. Was he a nutritionist? Was he a nutritionist? Was he a nutritionist? He was a nutritionist. He was a nutritionist. He was a nutritionist. He was not a nutritionist. He was not a nutritionist. He was not a nutritionist.